The Long Way Home, Chapter 15, The Huntsman and the Trooper. Everyone was recharged. There was fresh game in the fridge, a whole new selection of sweet fruits, and they'd found some tubers that did a fairly good imitation of roasted potatoes, if one could get over the slightly tangy aftertaste. Jason could get over something small like that, especially since they'd found some plants that were very flavorful leaves that could be used as herbs. A little on the savory side, but their diet was game and forage heavy for obvious reasons. Jason thought that Vi and Tundra were doing an admirable job of making it tasty in addition to edible. Everyone was rested. Everyone had gotten to stretch their legs or wings in Cadet's case, under or in the open sky in the fresh air. They were prepared for Vincent's big risk as they could get. It would have to be enough. Vincent and he had gone hunting together twice. He'd gotten to show off his tracking skills, such as they were, and only bristled a bit when the man's poorly concealed smug grin. Jason was pretty sure that he could pull something down eventually, but they didn't have the time to wait around until he eventually. Therefore, he swallowed his pride and paid attention to the man with more experience. Besides, he got the impression that those hunts were about more than just the food to Vincent. More importantly, or at least more important than how Jason thought or felt about the stop, both Vi and Cadet got to help out. Vi, of course, caught fish in the wide waters of a placid river once again. One of these was almost as long as she was, and everyone was duly impressed with her catch. Cadet, on the other hand, spotted some fruits as he flew at the tops of some trees that would have been dangerous for anybody else to climb. He had a hard time accepting the thanks from them by, but Jason had seen him preening himself in self-satisfaction when the other boy thought nobody was looking. They'd spent in total 3 days resting and recuperating. 3 days going over the plan in time, found around the campfire in lee of the Long Way as the stars blinked and twinkled in an alien sky. It would have to be enough. It was strange. It was maybe intimate, and a little embarrassing to expose. The Long Way's hidden compartments to the kids. Vincent had always thought of his ship's checkered past as something private, and to have it exposed, even at need, had him abashed. The plan wouldn't work if the kids weren't as hidden as it was, though. The George boy in Tundra spoke to his ship, though, to the Long Way, in seafarer's negotiation. He told it, he said, and tensed his jaw to let his implant know that he'd give them a little privacy. It sounded like private words of encouragement. They'd chosen their location, close to what, according to their recorded data, was an inhabited system, where a core wood and spine would current clash and might toss the ship with bad calcs back into the real space from hyperspace C. The kind of place pirates and scavengers liked to frequent and look for morsels. The kind of place a hostile power might see as a good place to find information. It didn't matter that he'd be up against scrub hosts. Once he was aboard their ship, he could be a knife in the dark until it was clear. The kids could stay safely hidden in the Long Way. It was the best he could come up with. It would have to be enough. One quick jaunt in hyperspace C later, and Vincent had set the Long Way on a tumbling orbit to mimic a distressed ship with a pilot far outside his depth. And even set his distress signal squawking. Of course, there wouldn't be any hypercom relays with standard international protocols in range, but the hostiles should be able to detect their squawking from hyperspace. Vincent's plan hung on the hope that a ship would be sent to investigate. Vincent's hopes proved fruitful. He clenched his jaw in grim determination when he felt the Long Way jolt beneath the influence of a tractor beam. Jason could hear his heart pounding in his ears as he felt the strange buzzing of overlapping artificial gravity fields in his teeth. He focused on keeping his breathing steady in the inky confines of the smuggling compartment. All he needed to do was stay calm, stay alert, and stay ready in case anything went wrong. All they had to do was stay quiet when the hostiles searched the ship, and then let Vincent do his thing. He sent up another silent prayer. There was a tremendous clatter as the Long Way settled and came to a stop. Probably. It was hard for Jason to tell with no reference. The second stretched into eternity as he strained his ears to hear past his heartbeats for signs that the hostiles had found the panel to open the boarding ramp. The eternity did come to an end, and after he heard the familiar hiss and whir of the Long Way opening up, her deck reverberated with the sound of something hard striking it. Many somethings. A high-pitched tap-tap-tap along with the sound of something hard being dully dragged across the deck. The panel of decking inches from his nose vibrated with the sound of it. They go past him first. There was a lot of muted clicking and buzzing from the panel concealing his refuge. There was clattering, and the sharp sounds of shattering dishes as the intruders treated Vincent's home with the rough carelessness of thoughtless intrusion. Jason swallowed his fury. The tap-tap dragging began to come his way once more. The intruders had found nothing and were going back towards the boarding ramp. There was an avian squawk to afterward. All sound ceased. Jason's heart seemed to freeze. The tap-tap-tap dragging moved towards Cadet's hiding place. Jason's heart thundered, and his ears bulged wide in the darkness. They probably wouldn't be able to find the wall panel that hid him. Probably. Except they knew there was a hiding place to look for. They might find Cadet. They might find the girls. Jason made his choice. Like a guardian angel, he silently slid his panel of deck plating aside and rose to stand in the galley. The hostiles were all showing him their backs. Their backs where grubs pulsed and squirmed. He replaced the panel and stepped silently. They had 4 tri-jointed legs that ended in pointed claws like crabs. Their undersides scraped the deck. Feather wielders, Jason thought, as he padded silently up to the host closest to him and drew back his hand with his fingers splayed in a grasping claw. He struck, and his fingers sunk into and tore apart the soft flesh of the grub. Ichor and gore splattered across the deck, and the host fell in wild spasms, death throes, while Jason stood there. Fear had fallen away. This is what he was made for, to shoulder the risk, to contend, to fight, to draw strength from those behind him. "Well, you found me. Now what?" he asked, the crab-like hosts that had put his friends home in such disarray. They lurched towards him, and he turned and ran to the boarding ramp and into the hangar bay, where another half-dozen crab-like grub hosts were waiting in the half-circle. He shot between them at a speed that startled even himself, at this even lighter gravity than he'd been practiced at, taking care with his strength in. Jason moved so quickly that he didn't get a good look at the poor souls being puppeteered by the grubs like flesh marionettes. He thought that they had arms. He was pretty sure that they were holding something. Weapons, maybe? He just started pushing off his strides to zigzag erratically. Hot plasma went past his ear with a sizzling hiss as it boiled the scant moisture in the ship's air. They were holding weapons. He cast his eyes around the neat and orderly bay for anything useful. Meanwhile, Vincent had heard Cadet's quickly stifled avian cry of fear. He had heard the intruder stop and begin to return. He had heard Jason's high, youthful, chiming voice taunt the grubs, and he knew that the plan had fallen apart. He extricated himself from the hidden armory and replaced the garrote and the small hand crossbow. He touched the deer horn scales of Cal's old knife and began to strap guns to his body. Quickly. 2 Magak pistols, an old revolver, the boarding shotgun, and a carbine he'd captured on one of his pirates' hunts. He slapped spare ammo blocks onto his adaptive camo suit's magnetic holsters and took up the heft of the old chipped tomahawk in his hand as something primal stirred within his heart. At the bottom of the boarding ramp, he saw the George boy darting and dodging at a frightful speeds of a Terran and quarter G, and that primal stirring bubbled up. A rage and a fury from the time of the hamstring on teeth and flint-tipped spears into flanks, from a time of flickering campfires beating back the dark and the cold, from running alongside a pack in the snow, from a time of tribe against tribe and pack against pack, rose into his throat. He let out a bone-chilling howl of fury and hatred. How dare they try hurt his human? He'd made them stop. He'd make them pay. He took aim, and the revolver roared again and again until there were half a dozen dead grub hosts twitching and spasming on the floor. He dropped the old smoking six-shooter, and the Magak pistol leapt into his hand as he sprung forward. The tomahawk's blade passed through a grub, killing it, and sending its poor host into its death throes. Its spike end punched through the host's thick carapace and sent ichor splattering all over Vincent's feet as he made the pistol send tiny shavings of ferrous material through another 4 hosts with the accompanying cracks of the projectiles breaking the sound barrier. He didn't bother counting them as they took the hint and scrambled away to take cover behind shuttles, or maybe fighter craft, tool chests, or other equipment. He saw the George boy change direction ahead of a bolt of plasma in the distance as he pushed off the support column. The kid's eyes flitted across the bay as his head swung back and forth. He charged forth and buried the spike end of the tomahawk in the host's head and let it rest there as the poor thing staggered back and forth as it realized it was killed. He took a spare second to extricate himself from his old RNI boarding shotgun strap and called "Chief" as he tossed the weapon into the kid's path. He grasped the handle of the tomahawk as the host finally fell still and finally noticed the hot plasma was flying past him. He snarled at the enemies. Jason heard Vincent call to him and realized that once again he did not fight alone. It was good to have a brother in arms. The old surplus shotgun tumbled graciously through the air ahead of him, and he kicked the deck to rise up to meet it. His young but calloused fingers closed over the weapon stock, and he curled his body around it, and he went into a tumbling spin. He came down in a careening roll, and kept his head and elbows tucked in, as he banged off the hard surface of a tool chest and sent it crashing to the deck, where he also came to a dizzy stop. He didn't have time to let the deck quit tilting beneath him. He lurched to his right and scrambled to get his feet under him, and assumed a load ready. Vincent was a grey-black blur of fury and death on the other side of the bay. There were 24 scuttling crab-like people attempting to pin him down. Another 8 were bearing down on him. However, there was one creature not like the others. That had 5 three-jointed crustacean legs, no limbs, more than half a dozen dancing and swiveling eyes that Jason could see, and no grub pulsing out of any point of its body. 1, 2, 3 of the creature's eyes seemed to focus on him, and he felt the pressure inside his head, not unlike the oncoming sneeze. Then the pressure suddenly vanished as the creature reeled and let out a high-pitched screech from an unseen mouth, while all the eyes that Jason could see rolled in their sockets. Jason came to some conclusions, took aim with the shotgun, and squeezed the trigger. The creature became a pinkish-grey smear on the deck, and the grub hosts let out their screeching as they tumbled, dropping their weapons and lost focus on their attack. Jason took aim again. Vincent spun and left his tomahawk embedded in another host's carapace, pinning the dying grub to it, and let his empty pistol clatter to the floor. Something had sent the grubs and their hosts into confusion and disarray, and he wasted no time in taking up his carbine and firing from the hip to dispatch the stumbling and unfocused crab things with a soft click-clack-click of subsonic acceleration. His ears turned before he did. He could hear a hoarse, high-pitched chorus of unceasing wails. They sounded too familiar. They sent a chill down his spine. He looked to the doorways leading deeper to the ship, and his stomach twisted. Those were Terrans, human voices, doggo voices, big kitty voices, and even chimpmando voices. They were screaming. Blood ran down their cheeks in runnels and bulging, desperate eyes. They were screaming. Vincent shouldered his carbine. Vincent set about stopping the screaming. Pity and terror chilled Jason's very marrow as he saw the Terran grub victim streaming into the hangar bay. He didn't let it stop him. He noted that among the Terrans there were some star sailors, Latray, and even a couple Exarch streaming in like a plague. He tried to ignore their faces as he squeezed the trigger. He failed. He could deal with that later. Jason advanced while firing on his hosts as they streamed out of the bulkhead hatch leading deeper into the enemy ship. They were unarmed, and it seemed that whoever had sent them had hoped to use them as fodder for all their ammunition. The enemy ran out before he and Vincent did. In the back of Jason's mind, certain facts were being linked, and conclusions were being drawn. These conclusions filled him with a fury that resulted in an overflow stream of profanity combined with a new and interesting ways as he grimaced and scowled at the bulkhead hatch left gaping like a hungry maw after it had vomited up his Terran victims. "This wasn't the plan," Vincent told him. Jason stemmed the profane tide falling to his lips and said, "They were going to find the others. Had to do something. Didn't have to be you," the older man countered. "Aye, it did," Jason said simply. "You'll have to go in loud," he continued. "I'll watch your 6. Vincent retrieved his old revolver and the Magak pistol he'd let fall, reloaded them, and passed the Magak to Jason as a backup along with a fresh ammo block for the shotgun. He didn't like the conclusions being drawn in the back of his mind either. Conclusions about pirates and their customers, and the fact that these Terrans were young adults. He didn't say anything about these conclusions. He just retrieved his tomahawk and advanced. "Keep your head up, kid," he snarled and advanced. "Aye, sir," the kid said simply. "Watch out, they have psychic CNC, unit. I think 5 legs, lots of eyes." Hallway by hallway, room by room, the two of them advanced. Vincent didn't bother to take note of the differences amongst the few other kinds of people who had fallen victim to the grubs that they encountered. But one and all, they were surprised. Vincent had some guesses about why that was at the back of his mind. He kept those guesses there. The ship was evidently small, and crewed lightly at that, as they didn't find more than another 24 or so victims, probably a patrol vessel. Probably they didn't quite expect a real fight. Vincent didn't care. These poor people were screaming inside their own heads, screaming for someone to make it stop. He made it stop. For the most part, they found the victims at stations or lying still at the rest in bare bunks, except the things that the kid had described. Those were often stood in the middle of a room of about 3 or so victims, and there was a grand total of 4 more of those, including the one on the bridge. Vincent had never seen a grub in real life, but every Terran over the age of 16 had seen the videos from the Valkyrie. Vincent suspected that the George family didn't wait that long, By the kid's steady hand, he supposed that he more than suspected. He could smell the cold sweat on the boy, and he caught glimpses of his clenched jaw and his hands clenched in the shotgun tightly. They had found more than a navigational chart on that ship, though. Jason regulated. He knew that he knew better than most Terran children just how horrific the grubs were. It still didn't make what had to be done any easier. Luckily, Vincent did most of the dirty work while Jason watched his sex. It didn't make seeing it happen any easier. He regulated anyway. Vincent was depending on him to watch his sex. He regulated until they found what he called to his mind the brig, despite its actual purpose as a holding pen for new victims. He saw the spreader. He saw the recently infected. He saw Terran kids like him among them. He had to look away. On shaky legs, he opened another door to yet another cell, dreading to find yet further doomed souls crying out for a release he couldn't bring himself to give. Within was a girl about Trondre's age, an Exarch girl. She blinked up at him with her dark eyes, and Jason thought that the scarlet shades on her natural coloring deepened slightly when those dark eyes fell on him. Her dress was disheveled, as if worn for several days, and he noted that the cell didn't have much in the way of comforts like a shower. "Hi," he breathed, a voice nearly broken by the sheer gratitude. "I'm Jason. What's your name?" To Jason's great distress, the girl hunched down on the deck and balanced on the bony protrusions of her knees and elbows and intoned, "O great one of two worlds, ye who come carries weight of ages, this one shall be called as thou callest her, yet in times before she is called the young apprentice lady Isis Magdalene. I did cease thou, son of House George, kindred of Godslayer, kindred of chain breakers in mine dreams, and did know that this bondage should be shattered by thee." "Please," Jason said as he swung his shotgun down out of the way in a strap and reached down to draw her to her feet. "I'm only a kid like you. Please, don't bow down to me." Vincent's blood had long begun to cool. His panting breath had slowed to near normal, and a quiet pride grew in him as he watched the George boy reach down and uplift the sole survivor of the ship of horrors. Then it clicked, and he knew why the George boy had told him to think about Gideon and the shadow. "Son of a bitch," he muttered, and shot the boy a glare. A wan and strained grin broke across the kid's face as he said, "Finally get it?" "Don't I get a say?" Vincent asked, failing to form a grimace across his face. A glimmer of mischief burned through the boyish grief and horror as he asked, "You want to try telling me different?" Vincent had to admit he didn't mind being considered family by somebody again. Not that he'd do so aloud. Well, maybe he owed it to the kid, even if he pulled that joke over on him. No, I won't." "Welcome home," the kid said as mischief faded and warmth grew despite what he'd seen and done. "I didn't know I missed you until we met." Vincent didn't exactly know when he picked Jason up in a fierce hug. End of chapter. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.